I'm Susan Moore, Community Engagement Manager with IIBA.
And I'm Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at the International Institute of Business Analysis. Today, we've got an interesting topic that I think we're going to enjoy with our audience. These sessions are meant to be live, so put your questions in the chat. We're here to answer your questions. And our topic today is, why is change management important? So Susan, we were talking a little bit about this. Change management can mean two different things to different audiences, right?
Yeah.
One is more working with people and how to manage change. Another one is more technical, right?
It is. I've had experience on both sides of that, both that organizational change management, but there's also the idea of application change management, which tends to be a more technical discipline. It's really about making sure that you're moving your code into your applications, that you're staying up to date with all of those. And today we are not talking about application change management, but that is a thing, application change management.
Why don't we start with a story? When I talk with other business analysis professionals, I talk about the more you do this, the more you end up with battle scars. A battle scar is something I define as a lesson you learned the hard way that you're never going to forget. And I'm going to share one with you. So I worked in an organization where I was working on environmental sustainability, and we had a cafeteria that used plastic forks, disposables. So one-time use, throw them out. Not great for the environment. We had found some funding for stainless steel forks, and we had support for people to be able to clean those through the dishwashers that were available. And I was leading this change, and I thought, oh, this should be relatively straightforward. We're just swapping out forks. Well, about 5 minutes before the business day, before the change, someone came to my desk and said, you can't make this change right now. It came across as aggressive. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes when someone's aggressive with you, you respond back the same way. And I said, no, we're making this change. I got a VP support. Well, that went to their VP, which went to the VP that was supporting this, that came back to me and backfired a bit. It was an example of change management I didn't handle well. And I'm very sensitive to that now, that I could have done things much differently. And that's why I think this is such an important subject for us in the business analysis space, because a lot of what we're doing is introducing change.
That's right. And you never know, change really has two components, because it's usually change not just to a process or a technology, but it's also change to people. So in addition to changing how they're going to do their work, you potentially are triggering some kind of emotional response that you may not have expected. And you have to factor that in. And so I think business analysis professionals are, they get called in because for these kinds of efforts, because we're known for our people skills. So I think it's something to be aware of, that you're not just changing, it's about the people that you're changing as well.
Yeah, and I like what you said there. It's about the emotional response, because when we meet in meeting rooms and we talk about changes, it's usually typically logical conversations we're having, but where people get emotional, that's really where you've got the hurdles, because it's a visceral reaction. I have studied sustainability. I have a sustainability professional certificate, and I've got a pile of books here. The one that I like a lot is by Alan Atkinson. And this is a book where I studied, in part, change management. The field of sustainability is about changing how we use fossil fuels and things like that. So change management is a large part of that. And he shared something I want to share with you today. This is on the United Nations website. It's part of a presentation. You can see the URL at the top. Alan was teaching us in this class about change management, and he used this amoeba that he created, amoeba for cultural change. And what I like about it is in the circled red area, it talks about innovation. So this is a group working towards innovation. The tip of that change is the innovator, the person who's doing the change. And then you've got change agents that are helping along. And then you've got the transformers, which are people that have the latest iPhone, or they've got the heated coffee mug. These people love change. And then you get into the mainstreamers. These are the people that will go with the flow. Two items I want to call out here. One is the controllers, and the controller is described as leadership in an organization, or it could be a regulator. You can always introduce change by making a rule, but making rules is generally not a great way to get people to embrace the change and adopt the change. And the one I love in this is the curmudgeon. This is the one on the top left here. This is the person that wants to do it the old way, never wants to change, and really are stuck on their ways. So the reason for having this diagram is to consider your stakeholders. Who are the curmudgeons you're working with? Who are the transformers? Can you get those transformers excited about the change? Can you get people, the mainstreamers, aware of the change that are coming along? And give those curmudgeons lots of attention. Sit down with them, understand what their emotions are around it, what they're invested in, why the change is important to them, that they're blocking. So I really enjoyed learning about this as a change management technique. So I wanted to share that, and you can find it at the UN website. It's open source, and all these are defined in this 100-page slide deck.
So what I like about that visual is that when you do have to do a form of stakeholder analysis when you are doing any kind of organizational change, you not only want to identify who's impacted or indirectly impacted or not impacted by the change, but you also want to get an understanding of the kinds of personalities that you might encounter. And even if you can't specifically name people in those categories, you want to identify them because you need to have a plan to manage resistance, right? Not crush resistance. You don't want to do that. You want to manage resistance. And so part of any really good change management plan in an organization will have identified the kinds of resistance that you might encounter and then have like a risk mitigation plan. How can you get ahead of it? Or if you encounter it after the fact, what is it that you can do to call in allies, get your sponsor to be more visible, bring in your transformers or your change agents to bring some goodwill. So knowing all of those folks, I think are going to be how they will perform will be really critical. So let me tell you one of my battle scars. So I
Okay.
did an agile transformation a number of years ago. And, we did a lot of rah, rah, rah. We're going to have self-directed agile teams. We missed talking to the managers of those teams about what their role might look like after we rolled out this agile framework. Um, well, the managers had two different roles, right? They were people too. They were just as impacted by this change as the teams they were leading. But also they had the added role of having to communicate those changes and how they would impact their teams. But because we didn't correctly identify how we would help the managers and what their roles would look like, we had some managers who had a very negative impression of this agile transformation, and some of them really tanked our agile transformation on those teams. We really struggled to get those particular teams on board. So, I'm glad that I had that experience because it reminds me of how important every role is in transformation projects and making sure that you address everybody's needs. Now, I know you've shown your change management model. I actually did some work with the ProSci, which is a change management think tank that's out of Colorado, I think. And they've got a methodology called ADKAR. Now, I don't have a slide deck, although I guess I could. But ADKAR, let me get my note out. A is for awareness. D is for desire. K is for knowledge. And what you're doing through those first three phases is you're enabling the change. So you're getting your messaging out, you're handling resistance, you're trying to build momentum.
Okay.
And then you get into ability and reinforcement. When you get into ability and reinforcement now, you are engaging people. So now I'm showing them how exactly their job is going to change. We're beyond that it's going to happen. They know it's going to happen, and now we want to focus on what it is that they're going to do differently, and we want to reinforce that. So that actually is, and they've got a lot of great templates. I know they've got certifications. We're not necessarily here to sell you on that because there are many change management frameworks out there, but that's a common one.
Yeah. I see we've got a question here. Please recommend books for sustainable change management.
Mm.
Not quite sure where that question's pointed. If it's towards sustainability and you're looking at books for that, connect with me on my LinkedIn profile. I can certainly share that with you. I've studied lots. On change management itself, it sounds like that ADKAR model might be a good resource. But that's a good question. Maybe we should look at that, Susan, and put a LinkedIn post out on that topic.
Yeah, that would be good. We've got our online library, and I know we were talking about that before we got started today about do we have, I am almost positive that we have got some change management books in our online library, which is a resource that's available to our members.
I see your screen flashing there. You're taking a look.
Yeah, can you tell?
Yeah. So let me fill in while you're doing that, multitasking. So for those of you who are not IIBA members, part of the IIBA membership gives you online access to over 13,000 publications. So you can read these, you can put them into a learning plan. And what Susan's doing right now dynamically is she's gone into that and she's looking up change management. The nice thing about this repository is it's not just books. So you can get the full 400-page book, for example, but you can also get an 8-page summary in some cases of these. They're also in audio format. So depending on what book is out there, you can get it in a number of different formats that might meet your needs.
And it looks like we do have some books on change management. And interestingly enough, we also have some books on application change management.
That's
So,
surprising.
so just as I mentioned, when you're taking a look at books on change management, if you see keywords like IT change management or IT service management, those are books on application change management. But we've got one in here. I feel like this might be our spirit book, Scott, because it's called "How to Fail at Change Management: A Manager's Guide to the Pitfalls of Managing Change."
Hmm.
So that's available in our library. But we do have, we might even have some. Oh, we've got some videos as well. How to be an effective change management, being an effective change leader, and those videos that are part of the online library are quick little nuggets. Looks like they're under 5 minutes. So there's a lot of great resources out in our online library for change management.
I want to share another story with you guys. Last night I was sitting at the dinner table with my son, who's in first year university. We're having a conversation around a diagram that I'm putting together. It's taking a whole bunch of complex things and putting it together in a simple, easy to understand method. And he's very much into graphic design. He said, "Oh, you're going to use your brand colors and all type of stuff." And I said, "No, I'm actually not going to do that." And he had this puzzled look on his face. I said, "I'm putting together a diagram that is a new concept to people. And if I polish it up and make it look professional and say, hey, look what I did, I might get some rejection to that idea. But if I leave it in black and white, maybe it's a little bit rough, and I approach people and say, hey, here's a thought. Let me know what you think about it. How do you think we can make this ours?" Like basically bringing people along the change curve is more effective than going really, really fast. It's a technique that I learned in this book. This is the Sustainable Advantage. This is Bob Willard who wrote this, well renowned in the sustainability field, taught me another course. One of the things that he taught was this quote, "Go slow to go fast." And when you hear it, it doesn't make sense at the start. But if you barrel through a change and go really, really fast because you want to get it done, the chances of people adopting that change are much lower. So you need to weigh the way off speed versus embracing the change. So this idea of going slow to go fast, if you bring people into the concepts, bring their voice to the table, get their input, get their fingerprints on it, if you will, you're more likely to have people adopt the change than if you were to create the perfect product in your eyes up front and try to sell that to people.
That is a great story. And I think, it reminds me of, the thing that we've probably both done a million times in our careers, which is create that straw man, which is just it's a draft kind of an artifact intended really for the purposes of getting feedback. And so again, that can be a way that you manage resistance. I'm not going to make this look like a finished product, because if it's a finished product, then people may assume that we are not getting any more feedback, that we're not interested in what they think about this. But if you bring something to the table that looks kind of unfinished and you say, I don't know, what do you think about this? Then it can again reduce those emotional barriers, and enable conversations about what needs to change. So I think that could be a great resistance management technique.
Mhm.
You're also making me think a whole lot about some of the things that I've encountered with an agile transformation. And sometimes we have organizations that pull out the agile, whatever their agile framework is, and they just want to, put it in place of whatever kind of SDLC practices they previously had, because, well, what with agile, you're supposed to go fast. But what I have always said when I've done those transformations is, guys, we're going to slow down first before we pick up speed. And I have often found that that is one of the barriers to more senior level resistance of agile transformations, because their assumption is we're going to go fast because it's agile. But any change, your best bet is to slow down, take people's concerns about it into consideration, and then get buy-in, and then pick up speed.
Yeah.
Okay, we've
Yeah, I
got
think
some questions.
that's a good point. I just wanted to sort of give the contrary view, sort of the balancing view of that as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't need to consider a lot about change management. Maybe you're making a small change on things and you can go fast. I don't want people to get the impression that every single thing you do has to be slow and you get into analysis paralysis.
Oh gosh.
What you need to do is assess the situation to determine what's the best technique. It's always about, what are the circumstances? What's the context of the change you're introducing?
Yeah, that is a great point, because sometimes if we're just upgrading a system, right, there's not, and maybe some procedures might change, right? You want to scale that change management effort so that it's using your time and resources wisely, while still factoring in the kind of change that's going to be made. So I think that's a great point. And we've got a couple of questions.
Right.
All right. Next up, how's change management and business analysis interrelated? And I think this is a great question, because on the surface, I think they seem like two very different things. And I'm gonna put on my uh, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. Well, business analysts, they just go gather requirements. What does that have to do with change?
Yep. That's some
Um,
people's impression of it.
That's right. That's right. But I think my personal opinion, in over my career, because I have seen that business analysis role start to focus more on bigger picture changes in organizations, that business analysts tend to be at the core of understanding all of the pieces that are changing. And even if they aren't the change manager that makes it all happen, they have a seat at the table, because they are able to bring up all of the things that they are seeing and hearing. And so I think they are well positioned for this. So how do you answer that question?
Yeah, I would say if you're new to business analysis, that might seem like a foreign concept. If you're working on mid to large size projects, change management is integral in those projects. In the BABOK, change management is in the strategy section, so not something that you would typically deal with on a day-to-day basis. But if you look at what we're doing, we're helping organizations achieve more. And to achieve more, we change processes, we change technologies, we get people together to communicate. All of this is change. If organizations didn't change, we wouldn't have jobs. So fundamentally, everything we do is towards a change. The question is it something that needs change management applied to it? And is that you need a professional change manager? Maybe you're in an organization that is doing significant changes and you need that resource. But I would say from a business analysis perspective, if you're at the intermediate or the senior level and the leadership level, change management is definitely part of your job.
And I think that can look like things like, You may be working with your support team to help them to understand what are the changes that are going to be happening in the systems so that they can update their procedures. You might be working with a training department to help review their materials to ensure that we're providing correct training. So you may not be out there speaking with huddling with managers, talking about how they feel about the change. What it might look like might be a little bit different, just depending on the level that you are and the kind of role that you're playing on that particular project. But it's a great question.
Yeah.
So, um, so let's see, until which level should the user engage in change management? I'm not
Until
sure I
what level?
understand. At what level? So here's how I interpret that question. When should change management start? That's how I interpret that question.
Oh, okay.
Let's
That's an
go with
easy
that.
way for me to think about that.
But for the person that asked that question, if I didn't get it right, give us a clarification and we'll answer that. But for now, we're going to go with, when does change management start? Well, BABOK has it as part of the strategy activities. And so that's typically, I know on organizational change that I've done, we've started to think about it at the point where we were even thinking about, what is the change? What is it that we're trying to achieve, and what do we think it might look like? Now, it may not look like at that level really a lot of details, like, oh, well, we're going to need to get some new systems in, and here's how that system. It might not look like that, but we are definitely starting to think about it very early.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the BABOK term, it's the business analysis body of knowledge. It's the globally recognized standard for business analysis. Sorry, we throw acronyms around sometimes. Yeah, the way I would answer that is, I love this planning phrase: begin with the end in mind. So if you're working on a small initiative that has low impact, maybe change management really isn't important for that. If you're working on an enterprise-wide change that's going to be changing perhaps people's jobs, thinking about that, begin with the end in mind. What is this going to be doing? Are people going to be displaced from work? Are people going to have to change their jobs? If you think about that right up front at the planning stage, you'll understand very quickly where change management is important. And when do you start that work? It's right at the start. You need to understand who the stakeholders are. Who needs to be at the table? Is it management leaders, HR, functional managers? So I would encourage you to think about change management from the very get-go. It's, don't wait until you're ready to flip a switch and turn something on. You're far too late.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm thinking about other change initiatives I've been on. I was a part of a team that was working on a merger of two companies, and so that involved not just change of the people, but also, because it was a public utility, it was also legislative change. So we had to get permission from the government and from local state organizations in order to do this. And so, imagine that your change effort is 2 years out from even when that thing is going to happen. So understanding the things that might have to change will also give you a timeline for when you need to start it. So definitely, if we were going to merge two companies like this, right, we can't just over the weekend turn on some systems and ta-da, hey, we're your new public utility, right? People have things to say about that.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great point,
Yeah. Okay,
about
so we've
thinking
had
about the
we've
end in
had
mind.
3 questions there. Keep your
Woo-hoo.
questions rolling, and we'll answer them. I wanted to give you an example of a lazy change. This just came to me as you talked about that. If there's a regulation that's coming in and you have to make some changes because of that regulation, you might just think, well, the law says I have to do this, so we're doing it. And if you give that reasoning and think of that reasoning through your initiative, you're going to have some challenges. Again, think about change management, who's impacted. Just because the law says we have to do this isn't a good reason to tell everyone we have to do this, right? There might be other advantages to the people, your stakeholders that are impacted by this, that can help them along the change curve. So just because the law says we have to do something, or leadership says we have to do something, don't just take that at face value and use that as your reasoning to communicate.
Yeah, that's right. Ultimately, change is hard. Any kind of
Yeah.
change, even if the law says that you have to do it, change is hard because it involves people many times. All right. So we've got some here's our next question. Do you think the benefit realization phase in change management should include the BA as well? In some organizations, change managers run the entire show. Um, so let me, I got a thought on that. I think for organizations that have created a practice around change management, those change managers are really like project managers for the change, right? So let's just kind of put that out there. And so I think good change managers understand that in order for them to be successful, they've got to do their own stakeholder analysis. I do think it helps when they identify a business analysis person to sit at the table. Um, should
Yes.
they be there for benefit realization? Again, I think to your point, Scott, it it depends on what that outcome is that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit for our listeners. Benefit realization is at the end of an initiative. And what you're doing is you're monitoring, these are the things that we changed. These were our goals. And what you're doing is you're measuring the impact of that change to make sure that you, quote unquote, realized the benefits of the project. That's a way that you can measure the return on investment in a project and how successful it is. So should BAs be involved in that? Um, I would say yes, they don't need to particularly drive that bus, but will certainly help in being able to interpret and measure those various metrics. Some of them might be soft metrics where you'd have to conduct a survey and some research, again, business analysis. Some of it might be interpreting the results of metrics that are there. Um, you know, maybe your initiative increased sales volume, but what were the other factors that were going on that might have also done that? So you need to isolate your change in that increase. So it's not, I would suggest it's something that a business analysis skill set would be useful for to help document those type of things.
At that benefits realization stage, you might also encounter change control, which is another term we should probably define here because that is a little bit different from change management. So
Mhm.
change control would be sort of what it sounds like. So this is identifying and controlling that change as it comes up. And typically that, usually is the domain of a project manager, but so for example, in the Agile transformation project I was part of, we had a regular committee meet as kind of our benefits realization committee. And we would identify issues that were coming up. How are we doing and where are we encountering any problems? And what we started to do from that was to identify a list of issues that we just needed to dive a little more deeply into. What is it that is causing this particular issue? That became a backlog of change control items that we would then work. And so change control being just a formal way that we would manage that from when the item comes into the queue, how do we want to assess the impact, who's involved, what it's going to take in order to resolve it, and then getting it resolved. So I think for that, someone with a BA skill set may be part of that committee to help, if nothing else, do some root cause analysis or do some estimating.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So it doesn't look like we've got any more questions here. Um, so, so, so it should. So for the folks that are listening on the phone, on our live stream today, how should they think about getting involved in this? Should they be asking to be part of these change efforts? How do they explain to somebody, their change manager, how they can add value?
When I think back to the organizations that I've worked in and the teams that I've managed, it's more typical of the senior business analysis professionals or managers to be in tune with this. Tighter relationships with senior leaders. Um, if you're wondering about change management, that's where I would go in your organization to start to learn more about it. I'm an advocate of paired learning. So if this is something you've never been exposed to, see if you can pair up with someone else who's doing the work and work together on it. It's the richest environment you can ever have. Better than going on a course, it's actually working with someone who's good at something. So that apprenticeship type of approach would be a great introduction to change management, to see how it applies to your specific organization and how the people in your organization are managing those type of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Okay, so maybe just one last question here. We've got one. In your opinion, what's the most difficult thing in a continuously changing environment?
I'll give you an analogy.
Okay.
I'm a parent and I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. And the hardest thing for me as a parent has been changing to recognize my children are older, more mature, right from being 3 to being 5 to being 7. I found I was always a step behind my children in terms of them being able to do things. And I realized that as a parent, I need to really pay attention to how I look at them and support them in a way, because change is hard. So it's not just work life. It's every day what we're going through. My iPhone updates and now it's black instead of white, and change is difficult. So I think it's one of those things that in a continuously changing environment, I think we're there. I would maybe reword that in a rapidly changing environment. Some organizations move really fast, really with different things we're working on. In that kind of case, I guess from my perspective, I would say move yourself mentally forward on the change curve to be on the leading edge of it versus the trailing edge of it, to try and hang on to it and get involved. I'm not sure that was a concise answer.
Well, but I think it was a good analogy. I think, because sometimes what we do in business analysis, it feels a lot like parenting. So, but I would say that, I was talking to a group of business analysis professionals yesterday, and we were talking about how rapidly our space changed just in the last 2 years, just in the way we've had to do work every day. Some of our projects got shifted to something else. And, I've heard a lot about this great resignation, and there's a lot of burnout and a lot of, I think, just mental health challenges. And that tells me that part of what we have to assume is, one, change is constant. It really is constant. Frankly, that's why that whole agile thing even exists. It's an acknowledgement that change is constant. I think that we personally have to be patient with ourselves. We have to be mindful that some of what comes up for us in change is sometimes genetics. It's sometimes past situations that make us anxious that we have to work through. But I think what we can do, ask our organizational leaders, is we need to have patience with the people that are doing these changes, because they are humans making these changes happen. And so when we can do things like, I love that idea of fail fast and fix it, right? Let's not, when we have to move at this pace, we're going to make mistakes in decisions or in products, and let's just assume that was a mistake, and then let's be accepting and move on to the next thing. So that's my 2 cents on continuously changing environments.
Okay, well, we've got, I think, an interesting session planned next. So in 2 weeks, we're going to be here at the same time, talking about where does business analysis fit in Agile.
Speaking of Agile.
Susan, I'm going to hand it over to you to close.
Right. So, and we're going to have a guest for our next one, Rylan Layton, who is an Agile coach. And I know you'll want to tune in, because he's got a lot of opinions about where that fits. So don't forget, it's 2 weeks from today, 10:30 a.m. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you soon.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll leave another one right here for you to help you in your business analysis career. If you haven't subscribed to the IIBA YouTube channel yet, you can click over here and click on the bell icon to get notified every time we publish a brand new video.